Yes, glad to be here. Glad to be here. All right, so I'm glad you all came back. Definitely seeing some names and faces that have been with us for the whole week. So I appreciate you all being here during our time together. This is our final session. And today we're going to focus on really kind of like an accumulation of everything we've talked about with the development of a personal action plan. My goal is to really think about and consider, what is the work each of us do? And what are the ways that we can begin to embed equity into our practice, into our positions? And so that's the focus and intention of today's session. We're going to get started with our traditional exercise here. Just remind folks I feel like there isn't anybody new, but if you can grab your piece of paper and make your 4 quadrants for your piece of paper here. I've got my 4 questions that I'll ask. Again, to center us into our conversation and to kick off. So, of course, first, we're just going to do the initial grounding. I'm going to set the 40-second timer for you to create your spiral right there in the middle. At this point, you all, I got a collection of spirals. They all look pretty good, I have to admit. I got 5 different, this is going to be my 5th spiral today. All righty. And as always, remember to breathe. Take intentional deep breaths as you just draw your spiral right there in the middle. Okay, and our first question in the top left corner. When you think about advocacy, what comes to mind? When you think about advocacy, what comes to mind? Our second question in the top right corner. What fears do you have about being a leader? What fears do you have about being a leader? Our third question, this is going to be in the bottom left corner. And this one, we probably won't even need the full 40 seconds for. Are you prepared to lead from where you are now? Are you prepared to lead from where you are now? And just place your thoughts in that third box. Okay. And then our last question, as I've asked before, what are you hoping to get from today's workshop? What made you log into this session today? What are you hoping to get from today's workshop? Okay. All righty. So hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to think of those questions. I've got two primary goals today. First, I want to talk about the concept of what it means to be anti-racist and the strategies around that. And then we're going to spend most of the time actually talking about how we can develop a personal action plan. What are some things that we can do and implement between the next 30 days to 2 or 3 months. That way we can each walk away with some sort of action plan. So just to prepare folks, we won't be doing breakout rooms today. So some folks will be happy about that, but we will be doing more writing today in our session. I have specific prompts because my goal is that you all will actually leave here with some sort of action plan that you'll check in on later in the year. Okay, so our first thought, I thought it might be important to kind of have some conversations around this phrasing of what it means to be anti-racist and conversations around equity in general. The first thing that I thought important to share is actually an executive order. So an executive order 13985 came out in January of 2021. And so if I can get from, for instance, maybe you all can use thumbs up in the Zoom here. How many of you have heard of the executive order 13985 that came out about advancing racial equity? See if I got any thumbs up here in the room. Okay. Not seeing any. So not surprising though, this is one of the reasons why I've embedded this into the presentations I do now. So this was one of the first executive orders that came out under the new administration. And I really love this quote here that it starts off, which is saying that because advancing equity requires a systematic approach to embedding fairness in decision-making processes, executive departments and agencies must recognize and work to redress inequities in their policies and programs that serve as barriers to equal opportunity. Oh, great. So Millicent had heard of it. Wonderful. Awesome. Achieving equity really has to go beyond just delivering special projects or special programs or that one DEI committee that an organization may create. It's really got to look at embedding into practice. And so there are a few main bullet points that I want to just pull out from the executive order for folks to know about. And actually, let me put the link in the chat here to the executive order in whole. That way, if folks want to dig into it later, you can. But one of the things is understanding that equity must be a core part of management and our policymaking processes in a very, very intentional way. I think some of the things we have talked about when thinking about inequity is recognizing that the inequities and disparities that exist right now have been intentional. The policies that have been put in place, you all, were intentional to be exclusionary. And so if we're going to focus on equity, we have to do things in that opposite direction by really thinking about our management and policy practices. Additionally, it's got to be tangible. I think one of the things that I thought so interesting that happened right after 2020, these last couple years here, with a lot of the social unrest that was happening, we saw a lot of companies making a public statement, whether it was a Black Lives Matter statement or the development of DEI committee. We saw a lot of these action steps. Yet there's got to be a little bit more than just that, right? There's got to be some sort of tangible yield that's going to happen if we're saying we truly are thinking about advancing equity. The other thing that I thought was really important on this executive order is to speak to some of the mindset stuff. And this is something we talked about a bit yesterday for those of you who were here, is we've got to work on our mindset. And the last two bullets here really focus on that, is this understanding that equity truly benefits all, and that there isn't this zero-sum game that says, oh, if we push forward equity, one group is going to win, another group is going to lose. For a long time, we've had this kind of one pie in the sky mentality about life and about resources in society. It's created competition, unfortunately. And what I do really appreciate about this executive order, it speaks to that as a core fundamental thing that we need to change in society. The reality is, if we close the gaps in income, wealth, financial security for families, our economy will grow as a whole. Everybody truly will benefit. And so we've got some work to do on that. I will say, you all, this came out in 2021. They just issued like an additional executive order that is the companion to this just earlier this year in February. I don't have that information here with me today, but I encourage you, if you do your digging, to look into this. The reason I mention it here is because executive orders have or should have power. They should have influence in society. And specifically, what the link is that if anyone receives even one federal dollar, you're supposed to be in alignment with executive orders. And just remember, the second executive order that came out in February is focused on having all federal organizations or folks who receive federal funding to develop an equity plan annually for actually identifying what you're doing, what progress are you making. And so what has been really interesting to me is I've actually been able to leverage the fact that this executive order exists now to have conversations around why we should be talking about equity. What are the tangible things we should be doing? Especially if I feel like I've gotten some resistance to having conversations about actually moving some things forward. I'm like, well, do we receive federal dollars and federal funding? And if we say yes, then I'm like, well, we're required to do this. And what I'd be interested in seeing is how many of you have paid attention to the fact that this executive order is now showing up in our grant applications. If anyone has done any federal applications here lately, especially this year or even last year, there are now a new section that mentions this executive order by name. And again, I share these things in this space because oftentimes we don't know these things. And I'll tell you all, I had a group out in California early May where I shared this information, and they were in the process of actually working on a federal grant. And, a woman in the audience hadn't heard of this. And so that night after the session, she went and looked at the grant application. She was like, oh my God, you were right. Right there in the grant application, it specifically mentioned this executive order. And these are prevention folks. And she said, we hadn't even seen it or recognized it. And because of the conversation, they actually went back in and re-looked at the proposal they were submitting to the federal government. It was a SAMHSA grant, and really thought constructively about how they can do their prevention practice with this executive order in mind, and considering the language they could be putting into their grant to say, you know what, we're thinking about equity and, underserved communities in the work that we're doing. So I encourage you all, especially if you all are part of any of the grant writing committees or pieces of your job, to pay attention to this in your grant. Because with the right language, that can give your grant application an edge, because not everyone is actually noticing that this is now a new feature that the federal government is looking for, people who are truly saying and showing by example that you are advancing racial equity in your approaches to the work that you're doing. So what I do want to share with you all is I did find just a short video about the signing of this executive order that happened in 2021. And so I did want to share this with you all so that you all could hear the words.
At the moment it arrived as a nation where we face deep racial inequities in America and systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long. I said that over the course of the past year that the blinders have been taken off the nation, the American people. What many Americans didn't see or had simply refused to see couldn't be ignored any longer. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world. It was the knee on the neck of justice, and it wouldn't be forgotten. It stirred the conscience and of tens of millions of Americans. And in my view, it marked a turning point in this country's attitude toward racial justice. When his six-year-old daughter, Gianna, who I met with when I met with the family, I leaned down to say hi to her, and she said, looked at me, and she said, "Daddy changed the world." That's what Gianna said, his daughter. Daddy changed the world. And I believe she was right. Not because this kind of injustice stopped, it clearly hasn't, but because the ground has shifted, because it's changed minds and mindsets, because it laid the groundwork for progress. COVID-19 has further ripped a path of destruction through every community in America, but no one has been spared. But the devastation in communities of color has been nothing short of stunning. Just look at the numbers. 40% of frontline workers, nurses, first responders, grocery store workers, are Americans of color, and many are still living on the edge. 1 in 10 Black Americans is out of work today. 1 in 11 Latino Americans is out of work today. 1 in 7 households in America, about 1 in 4 Black, 1 in 5 Latino households in America, report that they don't have enough food to eat in the United States of America. Black and Latino Americans are dying of COVID-19 at rates nearly 3 times that of white Americans. And it's not white Americans' fault, but just a fact. And the Americans now know it, especially younger Americans. One of the reasons I'm so optimistic about this nation is that today's generation of young Americans is the most progressive, thoughtful, inclusive generation that America has ever seen. And they are pulling us toward justice in so many ways, forcing us to confront the huge gap in economic inequity between those at the top and everyone else, forcing us to confront the existential crisis of climate, and yes, forcing us to confront systemic racism and white supremacy. It's just been weeks since all of America witnessed a group of thugs, insurrectionists, a political extremist, and white supremacists violently attack the capital of our democracy. And so now's the time to act. It's time to act because that's what the faith and morality call us to do. Across nearly every faith, the same principles hold. We're all God's children. We should treat each other as we would like to be treated ourselves. And this is time to act, and this time to act is because it's what the core values of this nation call us to do. And I believe the vast majority of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, share these values and want us to act as well.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks
So
for
I
watching
am
CNBC on
curious
YouTube.
of the folks in the room, and we can do this you can do thumbs up. How many of you saw or remember news coverage of the attack on the White House? How many of you in the room? Let me stop sharing so I can see the thumbs up. How many of y'all remember that? Okay, I know I do. I remember exactly where I was. I was like, what in the world? This is America. I didn't even know you could do that in our country. Okay, well, if you noticed, he referenced that event in his speech, which was 2 weeks later. So I'm curious how many of you remembered seeing this news coverage in general, if I can get any thumbs up for those. Okay, I was the same way. I honestly didn't even hear about the executive order for almost a year after it had been done and out. But I definitely remember the news coverage on the attack on the White House. And I bring that up specifically just to recognize and think about, if we are watching the news for how we know what's happening in the world, depending on the news we're watching, we may or may not see everything. But this is why communication is so important. I just think The executive orders that have come out have been really phenomenal, yet there's very little attention paid to them, truly, if you think about it. So this quote here, I love, and it just reminds us, it says, why be anti-racist? It says, you don't need to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself, and it's the only way forward. And so I personally like this only because I think sometimes when it comes to these conversations, people look for perfection. And it's not about looking for perfection. It's about understanding that we've all had experiences where we've learned some stuff that's not quite helpful, and we're unlearning even for ourselves. The reality is this work that we're doing, the commitment that we're making to making lives better for people in general, it's a lifelong process. Sometimes it's not comfortable, sometimes it's awkward. The truth is we've got to always be seeking opportunities to learn and engage in doing the work. And I think the hardest thing is when we start bringing the work and the conversations outside of our employment spaces and into our family and friend circles. And I think sometimes that's where the biggest challenges lie, where you realize, man, I've got people in my family, in my space, people I care about, people I even love, who hold some thoughts and philosophies that are contrary to what the way we need to be thinking for us to move forward. I want to think about some questions that us as leaders should be asking. Definitely the people who are in the executive leadership of the organizations would be a part of should be asking. And it's really taking a critical look at the way in which our staff reflects the community we serve. How are we also looking at the organizational climate? Do people feel safe in the workspace? Do people feel like there's a sense of belonging in a true way, right? And not just because we have a flag sticker or because we have a Black Lives Matter sticker, right? Or a safe space sticker, right? It's got to be deeper than just the signage, if you will. It's also important to think about pathways into leadership, right? We've been talking about equity and inequalities this whole week. And one of the things that many organizations have to look at is, as we're looking at the demographics of our staff, do we notice that it's more diverse in the lower entry levels of the organization? And a lot of times what happens is as you get up into the higher levels of leadership, the diversity goes away by gender. The diversity often goes away by ethnicity. And so we want to be able to really look at those and consider, are we really investing in pathways towards leadership? And then the other question that I think is so critical for us is hearkening back to our very first session of the social determinants of health and really understanding how those social determinants impact a person's risk and protective factors for SUD, risk and protection around getting access to treatment, and even so, if someone makes it through treatment, getting to the recovery spaces, what are the ways in which the social determinants of health actually help someone stay and be and support their recovery journey, right? These are some of the spaces we have to really be thinking about if we're going to talk about equity, if we're going to talk about making some change in those communities that we're serving. So these are some of the questions I think we should be asking. My hope is that you all will take this content back to your organizations, ask to our organizations, are we thinking about these things? How is this showing up for us? And what are the things we're doing to be intentional about saying that we are focusing on equity? So for our second objective, I want us to move into the writing part of our time together. And I've created what I call a roadmap to success. And I have a set of questions that we'll talk through. For those of you familiar with any sort of strategic planning, this will feel very, very similar to that. So hopefully everyone has their piece of paper. I have a set of prompt questions that we're going to walk through as a group. To develop our own individual action plan. This is completely personal, so do whatever feels good and right for you. The goal is that you're going to create a plan that you'll do, because the reason I've given a prompt for 30 and 90-day goals is my hope is that we'll actually reconnect in 3 months to see to what degree have you begun to do some of the things that you're about to write about today. Okay. So here is our first prompt. Now, I'll give you all a little clue into me. I come from the mindset and place of positive affirmations. I believe language and wording is extremely important. And so what you'll see is the words that I use for when I'm developing an action plan. Feel free to use whatever language best fits you. So the first question is really thinking about, for the organization that you work at right now, if your organization truly got it right, and you were to look out 10 years and say, man, we did it, what would this statement look like? And for me, I'd be saying, I am so happy and grateful now that my organization, fill in that blank, right? And so take a few moments to think about for yourself and where you work. Get a new piece of paper actually for mine. And to think about for you, if your organization got it right and you are truly doing equity in action, what would it actually look like? Just going to do a short timer here for us. And really think about this, because this is going to set the stage for all the other questions you're going to answer from here. Hey, this first question is what excites me the most, because I'm like, man, in 10 years, we do the thing that I've written. It's going to be good stuff, y'all. It's going to be good stuff. Okay, so hopefully you have a bit of a picture of an organization that you're truly proud to say, you know what, I work here and we're doing equity in action to the fullest. Okay, so that's the organization level and the vision that you see. What I want to step back from there is to think about your role. Okay, what am I doing to contribute to that vision? The vision you just wrote, in support of this larger vision, I am committed to. So think about where you are, what you do, and what is the thing that you're contributing to that's going to help make this vision come to life. Okay, so where we are going now is I recognize that, there could be a gap between where you are now and the vision that you placed on the first question. So what I think is important to also think and consider is this next question, which is sometimes we need change, policy change, support in order to see something tangible be different in our organizational environment. So what I want you to take a few moments to think about and consider, what policy supports need to be in place for you to accomplish the thing you just wrote, okay? And to recognize that, your organization might need to make some policy changes first before the larger vision can come to life. And so take a few moments to think about, here are some of the policy supports I feel I'm going to need in order to get started in helping to put us on a different trajectory. I tell you all, this is probably one of the harder questions, okay, to answer, because this isn't always the places that we think about. But what I've been learning is that without policy support, change is really challenging to happen. Right? Okay, so hopefully you have some thoughts there on your policy supports. The next question is to take a moment to think about, okay, we are here. 6 months is gone, you all. June is almost over. So let us think about, right? We've talked about a lot this week. Hopefully you've jotted down some things around what are some tangible things you could do. I want you to think even more closely to what is it something immediate in the next 30 days. If I were to check in with you at the end of July, what's something you could say you've done or accomplished? And then if I check in with you again in September, what is another thing you could say you've done that is putting you in the right direction of truly embedding equity into practice and into the work that you're doing? Okay, all right. So hopefully you've thought about a couple tangible things that you can check in on. If any of you have ever set a goal for yourself and not achieved it, uh, do know I have found that sometimes without accountability, it makes it easy to write something down and it not happen. So what I want you to take a moment to think about is who could be an accountability partner, 1, 2, 3 people maybe, but at least think of one person who you could share your thoughts with, the thoughts you've had from the week, the thoughts you've had about what is your contribution to your organization, and write down those names now of who you could talk to that you think would hold you accountable, right? So that when we get to 90 days, that the person's actually going to reach out, or that someone you can talk to regularly to be sure that you've done some of the things that you're writing on this piece of paper right now. And feel free, some of you may have made friends in this room. So, feel free if there's a person in the room that you'd like to be your accountability partner, you could always private chat that individual to let them know, hey, I'd like to, would you be my accountability partner? And just to identify who that is. So just a couple more questions here. All right, so we've identified who might be our accountability partner. The last question, which I think is important, it comes from my strategic planning background, is you always want to give yourself like a measure of success. How will you know that you're headed in the right direction? It's like the GPS essentially, right? You've got to plug in the destinations of where you're going. Otherwise, if you get in the car and drive aimlessly, you could end up anywhere, right? So take a moment to think about, look at what you've written on your piece of paper and consider, what might you use to measure your success? How will you know that you're headed in the right direction of truly embedding equity in the work that you're doing? Okay, all right, okay. So last thing I'm gonna have you guys do, and then we'll have a bit of a chat here. I am going to ask you all identified a accountability partner. So I am going to ask with us here in the space to take just a few moments here, especially if your accountability partner is not in the room and it wasn't somebody that you could direct message. Just take a few moments to email, call, or text that person. Just let them know, hey, I'm in a training. I need an accountability partner. I'll explain more later. I just want to find out if you'll help me in being accountable to the work that I'm doing. And so just take a few moments to close the loop on this, because we wrote who the accountability partner is. I'd like for you all to actually reach out to them. You don't have to do this right now, but the goal would be that you schedule at least 2 or 3 meetings with that person between now and September. Your first meeting obviously should be to catch them up on what this equity in action thing is, right? And then to share what your thoughts are around what are you hoping to do in your role in your organization as it comes to equity, and then plan a meeting later, closer to September, where you all can then maybe talk about what has happened in the gap. What are you doing? If you look back at your 30 or 90-day goal here, did you get to it at all? Did you do something? Okay. Because again, this series is called Equity in Action, which means we're going to do more than just writing and talking about it. The words should be coming off the paper and into reality. Okay. So hopefully everyone is making those connections and contacts right now. I know I did mine, so I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm like, ooh, okay. This is going to be good. All right, so I'm going to stop my share here because we've actually walked through building the actual action plan. And what I want to do is take some moments, we've only got 15 minutes left of our time together, but I want to take some moments to just talk out loud, debrief. This is our last session together. I'd love to hear any thoughts or reflections people may have. If anyone even wants to share anything that's going on for them as it relates to how you might be thinking about embedding equity into what you're doing into your everyday practice, I'd love to open up the floor for some conversation amongst us friends here today.
Good afternoon.
Hi there. Good to
Good
see you.
Yes. Well, I didn't want to be the first. I was going to try to hold back, but since we on time, so I just want to do a little inclusion on the measures about success. What I've done over the years, the people that I have and we have provided services to, and with some of the things, life struggles they've been having. So I have found much positive results as, they come back and say, and not only they write it, they tell me. And, within my community, I'm always seeing them. And so they still gives a lot of feedback as to how successful and what we've done for them. And also I stress to them taking better control of their lives. And just looking at some of the things that have caused, some friction in their life. And you have to measure and say, is it really that serious? And if it is, teaching them how to work on themselves to relieve themselves from their life traumas and other things that they met through life. Mm-hmm. And because, nothing is trouble-free. We've all had our ups and downs. But we have to learn strategies to get out of them, because if we don't get out of them, they're going to suck all of our lives. And, we won't live a good, happy life. Longevity is good to have peace and happiness. And we have that by understanding, letting go, be forgiven. Even when you're on the jobs, if you have a conflict, resolve it and move on. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted, just little things about just life in general. And thank you, Ms. Nicole, and good evening, Mr. Steve. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that very much so. Any other thoughts in the room? Thank you, Glenda, for sharing in the chat what you're up to. I love it.
Nicole, since other people are being quiet, I'll also mention something. I'm in a quiet room, but there's only one other person here and he's not concerned about me speaking, or he hasn't told me yet. Anyway, I am involved in a council that deals with child welfare issues. And one of the things that has driven me crazy is the fact that there are only white and Black people on this board. We have 100 counties and there are only white and Black people on this board. There's a need for Latinos, Native Americans, Asians. There's a need for geographical diversity. There's a need for gender diversity. We don't have it. And so I'm going to make a statement soon. We're supposed to be talking about recruitment within by August. And so I'm just going to make a statement and ask us to put it maybe in our bylaws that we need to make sure that we have diversity. It's not here. And nobody else seems to be concerned about it but me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Appreciate you bringing it into the space, right? Making it a part of the policy action. Okay. So thank you for that. Very thoughtful and like immediate, tangible thing that you're part of. Because Glenda, you are in North Carolina, right?
Yes, and you saw me just a couple of weeks ago
I
going after
know,
Latinos in the
yes.
Room.
So I know our state is diverse, and the fact that there is no very limited diversity on um, something that crosses the whole state, I think what you're saying is right on target. And it's like we sometimes, you all, we've got to be the voice in the room that speaks up around these sorts of things, right? That pushes the equity in action forward. Awesome. Any other thoughts folks want to share on how they're going to bring equity into action in the work that they're doing in their own workspaces?
Something I struggle with though is like basically in the state of Iowa, I think that like 98% of people in prevention are white women. And I can certainly like I see the problem with that. And I can talk all I want about wanting it to be different, but it kind of rings hollow when I'm doing the job and I'm a white woman. And so like I feel like a hypocrite. And I don't know what to do about that.
Mm, mm. Yes, yes. So, and thank you, Glenda, for saying you do not sound like a hypocrite at all. So I appreciate Glenda saying that. At the same time, I almost did a laughy face on, it seems like it's 90% white women everywhere. So, the thing is that there are plenty of communities across the country that are pretty homogenous. So, and this is why a lot of times when I talk about equity and diversity, I always like to make sure people understand that it's not just diversity of skin color. It's diversity in a lot of different ways, whether that's gender, religion, sexual orientation. There's all neurodivergence. There's all these spaces where diversity can live and exist. And so I appreciate you, Rebecca, even mentioning the challenges that are being experienced in the space and how do we talk about diversity when I'm a part of the cultural minority, the cultural majority, right? And that can be a challenge in itself. What I have been seeing some communities look at is truly taking a step back to look at what is the demographic makeup of the community that we are serving, that our organization is serving, right? Creating a match between the community served and who the organization is. And then what I've been seeing folks do is to look at what are the pathways into prevention, right? Because some of this is also about job opportunities too. I've been seeing some folks get very creative around connections with their local high schools, their local community colleges, because sometimes people don't even know prevention exists. So I think some of the pushing of equity looks at going generationally. Okay, how can we look and reach back to the generation behind us so that the folks replacing us in the future might look different than we do, right? Might be different than we are. And until we start laying some groundwork earlier in life, I think we'll continue to see that a lot of our spaces are just homogenous, just one group of people. And so that's one of the things I'd recommend in looking at and considering for how to change what's happening. Um, yeah.
That's actually something I also struggle with because like I'm bilingual in Spanish. I'm in a bilingual bicultural home, but and I've like tried to encourage like some of my like nieces and nephews who have been like in school, but then they like Um, but that seems like a disservice because of the pay.
Well, look, there's some structural things we got to work on there too, Rebecca. Because the pay in our world is quite pitiful. We're having a hard time recruiting anybody into prevention and public health because of that. So I agree with you. There's some structural things we got to look at and work on too. And that's a whole nother topic, the business side of prevention, that truly I don't think we've really developed and thought about. There's a poverty mindset in our workspaces too, unfortunately, that we've got to work on. So there are some bigger long-term things. I also feel like, and I realize we're getting close on time here, that this next generation is the key to revolutionizing and thinking about the work and prevention and wealth differently. This new generation thinks differently. They're bucking against all sorts of traditions of working 9-to-5s and all this other kind of stuff. I feel like we need to lean all the way in and figure out from that generation, how do we make the field of health and community health attractive, right? Because we need healthy people to have a healthy society and healthy economy. So there's a gap there. And you've mentioned so many different things. And I'm like, we've got to be gathering the right group of people around tables to have some structural conversations around how we compensate, how we pay, how we create pathways, how we do work untraditionally than what we've done for so long. So I think there's so much room for opportunity and growth in this space here.